Hi there. My name's Dave, and welcome to my little podcast. It's a podcast about the horror genre that shaped and influenced me. The idea for the show came from wanting to take a kind of guided tour through horror, at least the horror that had a big impact on me. Since meeting my wife, she's shown more and more interest in understanding not just the movies that influenced me, but horror in general. And I thought, why not make a podcast? Everyone else is. And I thought it could be something she could listen to whenever she wants, and a way for me to indulge myself in talking about something I could easily discuss all day long. So I dedicate this podcast to her, my partner, my universe. Also dedicate this to anyone out there who loves horror. This includes new fans and old fans, fans who climb on rocks. So, from my heart, I welcome you to my bloody love letter. When I was younger, my family lived in a neighborhood filled with young families. There were a lot of kids running around, and they were everywhere. It was the kind of place that there was always action happening. It was messy, it was noisy, and, well, it was definitely full of energy. Most of the families that lived in that neighborhood were just trying to do their best to make their way. They were struggling a bit, sure, but they were holding on. But then something started to shift. At least I noticed it. I was young, and I started noticing these things, in the late 70s, rolling into the early 80s. People I'd grown up with and families I'd known my whole childhood, they began to move away. When you're a kid, that kind of change feels huge. You spend your days building these little worlds with your friends. You ride bikes with them. You play street hockey with them. You make forts out of snow in front of your house. You feel like the street belongs to you. And then suddenly those worlds start disappearing. It was jarring. It was confusing. And for me, it was the first time I really felt that there was a change in my life. The things I was taking for granted, stability, my friends. I was beginning to feel that nothing stayed the same. It wasn't something that I realized overnight. It was kind of this quiet realization that creeps in when people start going one by one out of your life. That's just the way it was. That's just the way it is. But that feeling stuck with me, and in a strange way became part of what drew me towards horror in later life. The idea that the familiar can slip away, that something safe and warm can suddenly change. So where the heck were they going? Where were they moving to? In my city, back in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a massive push to build new communities. Whole neighborhoods designed to be, as they called it, a city within a city. It was meant to be a place where young families could put down roots and buy affordable homes, start something new. The city I grew up in was booming then. The oil economy was driving everything. Money was flowing, or at least it looked that way, and people were pouring in from all over. That surge in population meant constant construction and new suburbs springing up almost overnight. The area I remember most vividly was planned to house over 120,000 people. It had everything. It had new schools, and parks, and shopping centers. It had the promise of a bright and modern future. Homes were selling below market value, and buyers were even required to start building within a year, which gave the neighborhoods this patchwork of unique houses and a strong sense of community. At first, it was full of optimism. Young couples and migrant workers, new families chasing opportunity and stability. But when a place grows that fast, it also stumbles. The community had its growing pains, its share of tension and adjustment. Still, it became quite rapidly a part of the city's identity. And as those families moved there, many of them people I'd grown up with, I started to notice my own neighborhood emptying out one by one. I was losing my people.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Later on, I discovered there was actually a word for all of this. It was called suburbanization. That steady migration of families, the rows of new houses, the sense that something was being built, not just homes, but a whole new way of living. At the time, it just felt like life moving forward. But looking back, it was a transformation. Entire neighborhoods sprouting up almost overnight and carving fresh identities into the edges of the city. And that's where today's story comes in. Because in the early 1980s, someone made a horror film that took all of that. The promise of the suburbs, the safety, the comfort, the illusion of control, and turned it inside out. It captured the idea that beneath the clean lawns and the neatly painted fences, something ancient and something forgotten might still be lurking underneath. This movie left an indelible mark, not just on me, but on anyone who saw it during that time, because it was so timely. It reflected who we were becoming as families, as communities, and maybe as a society that had started building over things that we didn't quite understand. Today we're talking about 1982's Poltergeist.
The house looks just like the one next to it, and the one next to that, and the one next to that. A young couple live in it.
Give Ken a kiss.
You are so obnoxious.
With their 3 children.
Poor Ken. Honey, chew each bite 10 times.
And something more.
They're here.
Sweetie, remember last night? Do you remember when you woke up and you said you were here?
Uh-huh.
Well, who did you meet? Who's here?
TV people.
Something's funny going on here next door. Something,
We were wondering if maybe you had experienced any disturbances lately.
What kind of disturbances?
I don't know what hovers over this house. I've never sensed anything like it.
That thing is in there with my baby!
They're hundreds.
Now Steven Spielberg crosses a frightening new threshold into a world within our own. Its form is revealed.
What is it?
Its focus is clear. And the games are over. Poltergeist. It knows what scares you.
I still remember the first time I heard about Poltergeist. I was sitting in our kitchen, the same one where I'd spend mornings eating cereal and flipping through TV channels that barely came in. That's foreshadowing, by the way. When my older brother started talking about this, this new movie he had just seen. He was 10 years older than me, so in my eyes, he was basically an adult. Something that turned out to be not entirely true. But he was part of that mysterious world of people who could go to R-rated movies and drive cars and stay out late. He also had this way of describing things, like he'd seen something so terrifying and amazing that he had to tell someone about it, even if he knew I was too young to hear about it. I remember hanging on every word the way he said, "You wouldn't believe what happens in this movie," or something like that. I have a bad memory sometimes. Their house is haunted, Dave, but not like the old kind of haunted. And that stuck with me. Not the old kind of haunted. Because by then, horror was changing. Ghost stories weren't confined to creaky mansions or candlelit corridors anymore. They were moving right into the suburbs, right into the kind of houses people like us were living in. And I think that's part of why Poltergeist hit so hard. It was a modern horror that had the idea that evil didn't need to come from the shadows or from some distant cursed place. It could come from your own backyard, from your brand new house, from your TV. Foreshadowing.
Now is the time in our podcast to talk about the plot. Spoiler warning if you haven't seen this movie. Thank you for holding.
The Freeling family lives in Cuesta Verde, a shiny new suburban development in California. And Steven sells homes there. Diane runs the household. And their kids, Dana, Robbie, and little Carol Ann, seem to be living the dream. But that dream starts to sour when Carol Ann begins talking to the static on their TV. And then whispers,
They're here.
At first, things are almost playful with all that's going on in this house. Chairs move around and slide around, and objects move around and slide around. Things kind of seem alive with all this moving around and sliding around. Then things start to take a turn. They get a little darker. During a thunderstorm, a gnarled tree outside of Robbie's window comes alive and tries to drag him out, while Stephen and Diane rescue Robbie. Carol Ann is sucked into her bedroom closet and disappears. The family can hear her voice calling, "Mommy!" from inside the walls, from the TV static. But she's nowhere to be found. And it appears that she falls victim to that age-old stereotype of your youngest daughter being absorbed into another dimension.
Well, I guess I should warn you that we keep the room locked off from the rest of the house. Robbie's sleeping with us now. And Dana, well, she spends a lot of time with friends.
Well, how many disturbances have you recorded in the room?
We don't go in the room anymore.
Mr. Freeland, we'll record any psychotronic energy or event.
Yes, Ryan photographed an extraordinary episode on a case in Redlands.
That's right. It was a child's toy. A very small matchbox vehicle, just rolled 7 feet across a linoleum surface. The duration of the event was 7 hours.
7 hours for what?
For the vehicle to complete the distance. Of course, this would never register on the naked eye. But I have it recorded on time-lapse camera. It's fantastic.
So, out of sheer desperation, Stephen ends up bringing in a group of parapsychologists from the local university. And now we're introduced to Dr. Lesh and her assistants, Ryan and Marty. And they document incredible paranormal activity. Objects are moving around on their own and apparitions are appearing. We have strange lights flickering around. And they determine Carol Ann is trapped in another plane of existence. Like I said, this is something to be expected when your kids watch too much TV. In that she's trapped somewhere between life and death. Not just that, she's being held by multiple spirits. Some of them are benign, but there is a one particular entity that is called the Beast that really is the one holding Carol Ann back. In one of the scenes, we have Marty, who is the youngest researcher. He has a traumatic hallucination in which he tears his own face apart in the bathroom mirror. This scene was one of the key moments in the movie for me as far as really getting under my skin. See what I did there? Get under my skin. I'm funny. So he obviously runs out and he doesn't want to stick around.
We've had 2 experiences in the kitchen. This is with Dan.
Do y'all mind hanging back? You're jamming my frequencies.
Dr. Lesh calls in Tangina Behrens, a spiritual medium. This tiny ethereal Tangina person explains what's happening, that the house is built over a cemetery. Restless spirits are trapped and drawn to Carol Ann's life force. The beast is using her to control them, keeping them from moving into the light. The portal to the other dimension is in the kid's bedroom closet. But Tangina has a plan. Tangina decides to tie Diane to a rope, and Stephen's going to hold the other end. This will enable Diane to enter the spirit realm through the closet portal. The goal is to find Carol Ann and bring her back through the portal in the ceiling of the living room, which appears as a swirling vortex. Now, Diane goes in. She navigates the nightmarish other side. She finds Carol Ann in a state of suspended animation and brings her back. They both fall from the ceiling covered in ectoplasmic goo, but they're both alive. At this point, Tangina performs a cleansing ritual and then declares,
"This house is clean."
The Freelings now prepare to move out. Stephen's quit his job, and the movers are packing things up. Stephen goes to the office to resign officially and leaves Diane with packing the last items. While Diane packs, Robbie's clown doll comes alive and tries to strangle him. Diane rescues Robbie but is then attacked by the beast, which is an invisible force that drags her up the walls and across the ceiling. In Carol Ann and Robbie's room, the closet reopens as a massive portal becoming a supernatural vacuum, tries to suck everything in. The kids, the furniture, everything. Diane fights her way upstairs and saves both children from being pulled into the closet. They escape the bedroom just as it implodes into the portal. Diane and the kids, they all run outside, where the swimming pool construction site in the backyard has suddenly erupted. We see coffins burst from the mud and corpses float to the surface. Bodies are everywhere. Diane realizes the horrible truth. The development was built on a cemetery, but the developers only moved the headstones. They left the bodies. The entire neighborhood is built on a graveyard. Their house begins collapsing into the portal. Neighbors watch in confusion as the Freeling house seems to be eating itself. Stephen arrives just in time, and the family piles into the station wagon. As they speed out of the neighborhood, their house implodes completely and is sucked into the netherworld, disappearing. The Freelings drive away, stopping at a Holiday Inn for the night. Stephen immediately wheels the room's television out to the balcony. They've escaped, but they've lost everything. And the rest of Costa Verde remains, built on the same desecrated ground.
Now is the time in our podcast to talk about the cast and crew, the names behind the on-screen magic. Thank you for continuing to hold.
So, starting with JoBeth Williams leading the cast, she plays Diane, the mother of the family. Between her and Carol Ann, they were both kind of the beating heart of the film. She was an up-and-coming actress at the time. She was 33 when they filmed this. And at that point, or up till that point, she had done mostly TV work. Poltergeist was the one that made her a star. The film after that was The Big Chill. And she went on to do another film in '84 called Teachers, which was a very high-profile film at that time. She had a long and successful career in film and TV, and she's still working today, and she's one of those rare survivors of 80s horror that maintained a fairly solid career. Here's an interesting fact. JoBeth Williams had said that during the filming, she'd come home at night and find pictures on her wall tilted, and that things were moving around, or things had moved around. She have joked that she brought something home from the set. So that's That's creepy. So, playing the role of Stephen Freeling, the father, we have Craig T. Nelson, and this was his first major film role. He'd done mostly TV comedy before this, and he was a veteran of the comedy scene at that point. He had worked with Barry Levinson and a few others, but he really wasn't a household name. Poltergeist changed all that for him. He became a recognizable face, though he's probably best known for the TV series Coach, which I loved. That show ran for 9 seasons. But beyond that, he's had a long career. Recently, he was in Parenthood, and probably best known now for voicing Mr. Incredible in the Incredibles films. In the role of Robbie, we have Oliver Robbins, and Oliver was 11 during the filming. He's the middle child that gets traumatized by the tree outside his bedroom window and nearly strangled by the clown doll. So interesting story about that. Interesting and scary. During production, in the clown strangulation scene, the mechanical clown actually malfunctioned and started really choking him. Oliver couldn't get the words out to yell cut, but fortunately, Spielberg noticed that he was actually being strangled and stopped filming. This could have led to more of the mythology of the Poltergeist curse. Oliver Robbins did a few more films and TV shows in the 80s and early 90s, and then he largely left acting. He's worked behind the scenes in the entertainment industry. He's spoken occasionally about his poltergeist experiences and seems fairly well adjusted despite being nearly killed by a clown doll.
Keep on trucking, trucking.
Hey, who's ready to laugh? That went about as well as expected.
And now we have Zelda Rubinstein, and she plays the medium Tangina Barons. Zelda was 4'3" due to a hormonal condition. She was 48 during the filming and had done mostly local theater in Pittsburgh before doing Poltergeist. She's definitely unforgettable in this movie. That high ethereal voice and the way she commands the room despite her tiny stature. "This house is clean" has become one of her signature lines. She had a long career after this, including the sequel to Poltergeist and various TV appearances. She became a gay rights activist and was quite outspoken. She died in 2010 at the age of 76 from natural causes. I think Tangina is pretty iconic. The character couldn't have worked, though, without the brilliance and the humor and the heart of Zelda Rubinstein.
She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane. They are attracted to the one thing about her that is different from themselves. Her life force, it is very strong. It gives off its own illumination. It is a light that implies life and memory of love and home and earthly pleasures. Something they desperately desire but can't have anymore. Right now, she's the closest thing to that. And that is a terrible distraction from the real light that has finally come for them. Do you understand me?
Now, the group of parapsychologists was led by Dr. Lesh, and Dr. Lesh was played by Beatrice Straight. She was a very, very well respected stage and screen actress. She'd actually won an Oscar for the movie Network in 1976, despite only having 5 minutes of screen time. She brings gravitas to the role of the lead parapsychologist. She was the serious presence and the scientific authority in this film. She had a distinguished career, and unfortunately, she passed away in 2001 at the age of 86. Rounding out the parapsychologist crew, we have Richard Lawson playing Ryan. And Lawson had a solid career in TV and film and is still working today. The character of Marty is being played by Martin Casella. And he was the fella who had the infamous face-peeling hallucination. He sold the horror of that scene. And like I had mentioned earlier, this was one that really affected and warped my young mind. But yeah, I'm still okay. And then we also have James Karen, who plays Stephen Freeling's boss, Mr. Teague. He's the sleazy developer. And he has a great scene at the end where he's trying to sell a house while coffins are erupting in the background, still keeping up the sales pitch. James Karen was a fantastic character actor, and he had constant work in film. One of the films that I totally adore him for was in The Return of the Living Dead in 1985, which may or may not be on my list. We'll have to get there. So you may have noticed that I didn't bring up the actresses that played Carol Ann and the oldest sister, Dana. I wanted to spend a little bit more time discussing them. There's this thing called the Poltergeist curse, and this was primarily fueled by the stories behind these two actresses. So let's start with Carol Ann. Carol Ann was played by Heather O'Rourke. She was born in December of 1975 in San Diego. The story of how she was cast is a little bit of a Hollywood legend. In 1980, when Heather was 5, she and her mother were having lunch in the MGM commissary. And in comes Steven Spielberg, who was working on something else. Saw this little blonde girl and approached them. He said something like, "I'm making a movie about ghosts. Do you think you'd be interested?" That's it. No audition. Spielberg just knew. He saw something in her, that combination of innocence and presence, that ethereal quality. He cast her right on the spot. Heather filmed the first Poltergeist when she was 5 to 6 years old. And by all accounts, she was a natural, sweet, professional, unnervingly good at taking direction. The famous "They're Here" scene, that tiny voice, that calmness, that was just Heather being Heather. She became the face of the franchise. When Poltergeist was a hit, she was everywhere. She was on talk shows and magazine covers. This iconic image of this little blonde girl in the white nightgown reaching toward the TV is as iconic as the film itself. She reprised the role of Carol Ann in the 2 sequels. She also did things like she played on Happy Days, and she was on Webster, and she did a bunch of guest appearances during that time. She built a solid child acting career, and on all appearances, she seemed happy and well-adjusted. Her mother was protective, and she attended regular school and had friends. She wasn't one of those exploited child stars with horror stories. By all accounts, she was a normal kid who happened to act.
So we're back here. Now, you're not only here to film Poltergeist 3, but you're also here to help us out, Heather.
Yeah, the reason why I'm here, because I know how it feels to be sick. Because in February, I was very sick and I almost died. Because I got these stomach pains. And my parents took me to the hospital and they said that I just had a bad case of the flu. But one day I came back home from school and my feet were all swelled up. They were really fat. And so my parents brought me back to the hospital and they admitted me right into the hospital. They took all these blood tests and x-rays until they found out that I got a parasite from drinking water in the mountains where we used to live. And so they gave me all this medication and all that, and I'm feeling much better now.
In January of 1987, Heather started having flu-like symptoms. She was misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory bowel disease. She was put on medication and she seemed to improve. She continued having some issues, the stomach pain and the nausea. Doctors kept treating it as Crohn's. Meanwhile, she kept on working, filming Poltergeist 3 in Chicago in 1987-88. Heather was a professional and she kept on working despite not feeling very, very well. On January 31st in 1988, the night before she was supposed to have surgery to address what doctors still thought was Crohn's, Heather became gravely ill. She was at home with her mother and sister at that time. She went into cardiac arrest. The paramedics rushed her to Children's Hospital in San Diego. She died on the operating table on February 1st, 1988. She was only 12 years old. The family authorized an autopsy to reveal the truth, and they found it. Heather had a congenital intestinal condition called intestinal stenosis, which is a narrowing of the intestine. This had been slowly causing a blockage. The acute cause of death was septic shock brought on by the intestinal obstruction, which led to cardiac arrest. Heather had been misdiagnosed for over a year. If the stenosis had been caught earlier, it could have been surgically corrected. Instead, she was treated for the wrong condition while her actual condition worsened. The medical examiner ruled her death natural, but noted it was distinctly unusual. This condition usually presents much earlier in life and is typically caught. It was a tragic failure of diagnosis.
Guess who's back in town?
Poltergeist 3 was in post-production when Heather died. The filmmakers faced an agonizing decision: to finish the film or to shelve it completely. They finished it as a tribute to her, or so they said. It was released in June of 1988, 5 months after her death, and dedicated to her memory. Watching it is eerie. She's clearly not well in some scenes. She looks pale and tired. They had to use a body double for some shots because she was just too sick to finish filming. Knowing what we know now, it's genuinely heart-wrenching and painful to watch. Her mother, Kathleen O'Rourke, was devastated. She later sued the doctors for medical malpractice, arguing the misdiagnosis had cost Heather her life. I believe the case was settled, but no amount of money brings back your child. In the role of Dana, the eldest daughter, we have Dominique Dunne. She was the daughter of Dominic Dunne, a writer and producer who would later become famous as Vanity Fair's celebrity trial correspondent. Brother Griffin Dunne, you might know from American Werewolf in London, again, which may or may not be on this list. Dominique was driven and she was talented. She wanted to act. She studied at Colorado State University and then moved back to LA to pursue acting seriously. She started getting work in TV movies, such as Diary of a Teenage Hitchhiker and The Day the Loving Stopped. She also appeared on TV shows like Hill Street Blues and Chips. She was beginning to get some momentum. Then she got cast in Poltergeist. Now, her role as Dana wasn't the biggest role, especially of the family members. Dana is mostly peripheral to the haunting, the normal teen daughter, but it was a major film, a Spielberg production. It was going to be her breakthrough. The film was released in June of '82 to a lot of success, and she was 22, playing a 16-year-old. But she had suddenly gained major film visibility. Her career was beginning to blossom. Now, this is where, again, tragically, things take a turn. In 1981, Dominique met a man by the name of John Sweeney. John was a sous chef at Mon Maison, an upscale LA restaurant. He was 5 years older than her, but they started dating. The relationship quickly became troubled. Sweeney was controlling, and he was jealous and possessive. He had a history of violence. He had been abusive with a previous girlfriend. Dominique didn't know this initially, or maybe hope she could change him. The relationship quickly became abusive and violent. Sweeney would physically abuse her multiple times. He would choke her and hit her. He was insanely jealous of her career. He was insanely jealous of her co-stars, or really any man who spoke to her. He attempted to isolate her from friends and family, to control her. On August 27th, 1982, there was a major incident. Sweeney attacked Dominique at her home. He beat her, tried to choke her. She called her friends and they found her with bruises. She ended the relationship, she got a restraining order, and she told him to stay away. For a few weeks after that, she tried to rebuild her life without him. She was working. She just finished Poltergeist and was getting more offers. She was trying to move on. On October 30th, 1982, Sweeney couldn't let it go. He kept calling, he kept showing up and harassing her. And on that day, just weeks before Dominique's 23rd birthday, he came to her home in West Hollywood. She was rehearsing with her co-star, David Packer, in her house for the TV miniseries V, which she was filming. Sweeney showed up outside. Dominique went out to talk to him, trying to get him to leave. David Packer heard arguing outside. Then it went quiet. He looked out, and Sweeney was on top of Dominique, strangling her in the driveway. Packer called 911. By the time paramedics arrived, Dominique had been strangled for 3 to 4 minutes. She was unconscious and brain dead. Sweeney was still there in a daze and told police that he killed his girlfriend. Dominique was on life support at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Her family, her father, Dominic, her mother, Ellen, her brother, Griffin, kept vigil. They knew she was brain dead, but they held hope for days. On November 4th, the family made a gut-wrenching decision to remove Dominique from life support. Dominique Ellen Dunn died at 22 years old, just 5 months after Poltergeist made her a rising star. John Sweeney was charged with murder, and the trial in 1983 became a nightmare for the Dunn family. The defense for John Sweeney argued that it was a crime of passion, and that he only intended to harm, not kill, and that he was provoked by jealousy, and that he had diminished capacity due to emotional distress. The prosecution countered that this was premeditated. He had threatened her to kill her before. He had a history of violence, and he strangled her for 3 to 4 minutes. You don't accidentally strangle someone that long. This was just plain, cold murder. The judge in the case had made several rulings that devastated the prosecution. He excluded evidence of Sweeney's prior abuse of Dominique. He excluded testimony from his ex-girlfriend about previous violence. He basically neutered the case. The jury convicted John Sweeney of voluntary manslaughter, not murder. The judge in the case sentenced Sweeney to 6.5 years. He served 3 years and 7 months. For killing Dominique Dunn, strangling her in her own driveway, John Sweeney served less than 4 years. He was released in 1986. He changed his name to John Maura and went back to working as a chef.
There was a restaurant called Ma Maison, a big famous Hollywood restaurant. Mm-hmm. And the chef there they had a romance. Yeah. And he stalked her. She became frightened. She never told us he was abusive to her, and he killed her. He killed her, and it was something that just changed the lives of all of us in my family, my wife, my 2 boys, me.
Did you know the guy before this happened? Had you met him?
Oh, yeah. Met him, and none of us liked him. And, you know, he thought it was because it was a class thing, that he was the whatever, and he thought we were this. And But that wasn't why. There was something creepy about this guy. But women liked him.
Did you try talking to Dominique about it?
Well, no, we didn't know that he was abusive, you see, until it was too late. And
how did her death change your career path?
Well, it changed everything. Just not my career path. It was just everything in my life changed. I mean, things that have been important to me once weren't important to me anymore. Things that, everything changes. Everything, when it's just such a jarring thing to your. We all got, I was divorced, and my wife and I were closer than we were at the most intimate part of our marriage.
Dominique's father, Dominic Dunn, was shattered. He'd been estranged from his daughter for a period, although they had reconciled before her death. And the murder destroyed him. He channeled his grief into advocacy and writing. He wrote an article for Vanity Fair about the trial, titled Justice, a father's account of the trial of his daughter's killer. It launched his career as a writer covering celebrity trials. He covered the Menendez brothers, Klaus von Bülow, Phil Spector, Robert Blake, and most famously, the O.J. Simpson trial. He became an advocate for victims' rights, particularly in domestic violence cases, and he testified before Congress about inequities in the justice system. He wrote about Dominique constantly. In every trial he covered, he saw Dominique. And he passed away in 2009, still carrying that grief. In the two different stories of Heather and Dominique, I struggled whether I should actually include these stories about them. I ended up adding because I felt that in telling the story of Poltergeist, they inevitably come up in conversation. So I felt that in order for those that didn't know about it, might want to have more context. I didn't want to make it lurid. I just felt that at least providing some of the facts around this would have been insightful.
And this stuff all works as long as the audience can find some logic for it. That's why I wanted to do that, just that little transition from the ghost at the top of the stairs to just for a moment the beast. Ghost stories usually avoid seeing ghosts. And when they do see ghosts, they're three-dimensional and they're real people. I thought, this is a real golden opportunity to do a spirit coming down the stairs for the first time. But we shouldn't see his face, though. We shouldn't see his face. Just the feeling of the body and the arms coming up.
Yeah.
And it's as if he's going to, this thing is growing out of her, and it's getting larger and larger, and the shoulders are almost going up to the ceiling. Just when you begin to see the fingers, it goes whoosh, breaks up like blowing a smoke ring apart in the air, and then goes shooting up into the area by location.
The other story that is outside of watching the film itself, and one that's been discussed probably ad nauseum at this point, is this great Poltergeist authorship controversy. And the question of who really directed Poltergeist. The credits say Tobe Hooper. The rumors say Steven Spielberg. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But this has been argued for over 40 years. And it's a part of the legacy of Poltergeist. So the official story is, in the credits you see Tobe Hooper directed it, and that it was produced by Steven Spielberg along with his partner Frank Marshall. It was written by Steven Spielberg, Mark Grace, and Mark Victor. On paper, it's clear. Tobe Hooper directed this. Spielberg produced and wrote it. But almost immediately after it was released, whispers started. Did Spielberg actually direct this? Now, officially, here's some context. Officially, Spielberg was contractually obligated to Universal, and he couldn't direct another film while making E.T. He was deep in pre-production and production on E.T. during 81-82. E.T. was his baby. It was his most personal film up to that point. Universal had locked him in, and he couldn't officially direct 2 films simultaneously. But Spielberg had developed the Poltergeist concept. It came from his own anxieties about suburbia, about television, about childhood fears. He'd written it. He desperately wanted to make it. So, what was the solution? The solution was to hire a director he respected, Tobe Hooper, the guy who made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and put his name on it. To produce it himself, that's where it gets complicated. Some say Spielberg thought he could give Hooper creative control. Others say Spielberg always intended to shadow direct it. Still, others say it evolved into Spielberg taking over because Hooper wasn't getting what Spielberg wanted. Beyond all this speculation, there are observations we can make as film viewers. If you're familiar with either of the director's style, you can make your own judgments. The arguments for Steven Spielberg having a lot more say in the direction, just look at certain things that are in the film. Specifically, he presents a child's perspective on wonder and terror. It's a hallmark of Spielberg films. He embraces the warm family dynamics before horror intrudes. He loves lens flares. He loves the camera movements. It's those smooth tracking shots. And the score done by Jerry Goldsmith, who had been nominated for his work on Poltergeist, also has that certain Spielberg feel. John Williams was working on E.T., so Spielberg had to reach out to Jerry Goldsmith to do the work. But it's very much in that vein of warm and fuzzy and very familial. But what was clear was that this was Spielberg's vision, and it was built upon his idea of creating a modern-day ghost story. Spielberg understood something crucial about fear. It's most effective when it invades the spaces where you feel safest. He knew that the most effective ghost stories aren't set in crumbling Victorian mansions or fog-shrouded English moors anymore. They're set in the house that looks exactly like yours. For centuries, ghost stories followed a formula. Old building, dark history, isolated location, and that all equals a haunting. The message was always go to that old dark place and bad things happen, and stay in the modern, well-lit world, and you're safe. Spielberg saw the flaw in this logic for contemporary America. By the early 80s, most Americans didn't live anywhere near Gothic mansions. They lived in brand new subdivisions in places that didn't exist 10 years ago. They were living in the suburbs. His concept was a little revolutionary because it inverted every assumption about where horror lives. In traditional ghost stories, old equals haunted, and the city equals dangerous, and being isolated means you're vulnerable, and the past is threatening. To contrast that, anything new had to be safe, and the suburbs had to be refuge, and community meant you were protected. living in the present, well, that offered some security. But Poltergeist changed that. And in 1982 America, no space felt safer than the suburbs. This was the Reagan era. It was filled with optimism and the idea of prosperity and the triumph of the middle class. Suburbs represented a few things. They represented an achievement of the American dream, an escape from the urban decay. It represented safety for raising your children and control over your own environment. It was the rewards of doing everything right. But it was asked, what if doing everything right puts you in danger? What if the house you save for is cursed? What if the neighborhood you move to for safety is built on death? What if the community that welcomed you is living on a lie? And what if the American dream is a beautiful nightmare? This wasn't just scary, it was existentially terrifying. Because the Freelings did everything they were supposed to do. They bought a house in a good neighborhood. Stephen has a good job. Diane is a devoted mother. The kids are normal, happy, loved. They're living the exact life that millions of Americans were living or aspiring to live. And evil comes for them anyway. And this approach was so effective. When you watch a Gothic horror film, you experience a type of aesthetic distance. You might say to yourself, that's a creepy old mansion, glad I don't live there. The fear is theoretical. You're not identifying with the space. You're voyeuristically watching people stupid enough to go into the scary place. But when you watch Poltergeist, there's no distance. That living room looks like your living room. That street looks like your street. That family looks like, well, it doesn't look like my family, but it could look like your family, or your neighbor's family, or the family you want to be. The Freeling house isn't visually threatening. It's aggressively normal. It has beige walls and wood paneling. It has comfortable furniture and toys scattered about the place. The TV is always on. There's a kitchen with a breakfast nook. And there's a backyard with a pool being installed. It's identical to 10,000 other houses in 10,000 other developments. Spielberg deliberately made it ordinary because that's the horror. The evil isn't in some distant, avoidable place. It's in the ordinary suburban home. The audience sitting in theaters in 1982, many of whom had recently bought suburban homes themselves, they couldn't just dismiss this. They couldn't just say, that would never be me, because it literally was them. Same house, same street, same life. Spielberg brought the haunted house home. One of the things I liked about Poltergeist was how Spielberg took some of the most mundane elements of suburban life and making them threatening. For example, the TV, which is the centerpiece of the modern living room. It's a babysitter for a generation of kids. And that becomes the portal to hell. Or somewhere. The backyard tree, it's the suburban status symbol. It's the shade for summer barbecues. And that tries to devour Robbie. The swimming pool, it's the ultimate suburban luxury. It's a symbol of success. And that erupts with corpses. The closet, well, Closets have always been scary, so I don't even want to touch that one. Spielberg systematically takes everything that's supposed to make suburban life comfortable and secure, and he turns it against the family. The house itself becomes the enemy. This is psychological warfare for us as the audience. And after watching Poltergeist, you may go home and look at your house a little differently. That tree outside your window, maybe it's a little too close. And the static, if there's such a thing anymore, after the programming ends, is something in there? Do I hear voices? And the closet door, well, like I said, that was always scary, and that will never stay shut. What the heck is in there? Spielberg helped make millions of people afraid of their own homes. Poltergeist does fuse some elements from traditional ghost stories in that there's a past refusing to stay buried, and that there's this inherited guilt and revenge from beyond the grave, and historical injustices that demand recognition. But also adds corporate greed. Developers were cutting corners, and consumer capitalism, buying into a product that's just outright defective. Environmental desecration, building over burial grounds. Suburban complicity, in that everyone was benefiting from this lie. Modern alienation, families living in their cookie-cutter boxes. And technology as a threat, such as the TV being a conduit to another dimension. The ghosts in Poltergeist aren't traditional vengeful spirits with a specific grudge. They're displaced souls. People who were moved aside for profit and literally paved over so suburbs could be built. The haunting isn't personal, it's systemic. Stephen Freeling sells houses in the development. He's part of the machine. When the ghosts come for his daughter, it's not random. His family built their comfort on someone else's grave. The haunting is consequence, karma, the buried truth erupting. This resonated in '82 because modern audiences were just beginning to grapple with the environmental costs of suburban sprawl and the racism and exclusion that built white suburbs, the economic unsustainability of endless growth, the spiritual emptiness of consumer culture. Poltergeist tapped into guilt. The audience knew on some level that their suburban paradise came at a cost. Spielberg made them face it. In doing so, he could have made it a lot more cynical. But he struck a bit of a tonal balance. He could have made it more of a harsh indictment on suburban hypocrisy. Instead, he made it empathetic. The Freelings aren't villains, they're victims. They're good people caught in a bad system. We root for them because they're us. He could have made it gritty and punishing like typical 1970s horror, but instead he gave it warmth. The family genuinely loves each other. Their home is comfortable. Before the haunting starts, their life looks appealing. This makes the violation more devastating. We want them to be okay. We want their home to be safe. Because if their home isn't safe, no home is safe. He could have also made it art house and obscure. Instead, he made it accessible, a mainstream PG-rated film that grossed over $120 million. Spielberg wanted to terrify everyone, not just horror fans. And he succeeded. The brilliance of it is that he made a film that celebrated and critiqued suburbia simultaneously. You leave Poltergeist both wanting a loving family in a nice house and knowing that their houses and neighborhoods can be built on lies. You're charmed by the feelings and disturbed by what they represent. You want them to survive and you understand they're complicit. That ambivalence is what makes it a little bit more sophisticated than on the surface. Poltergeist remains effective 40 plus years later because suburban fear hasn't gone away. If anything, it's intensified. The anxieties that Spielberg tapped to in 1982 seem to be more true now than they were then. We know more about housing discrimination and environmental racism, climate catastrophe, economic inequality. We know the suburbs were built through exclusion and remain segregated. We know about the ecological cost of sprawl. We know about loneliness through the epidemic and the screen addiction and the hollowness of consumer culture. We know the Freeling house is haunted because we might know a little bit about trying to bury history ourselves. Poltergeist is number 15 on my list of top 20 80s horror films that shaped and influenced me. It's had a lasting impact, not just on myself, but on horror movies that followed it. It opened the door for Wes Craven's movies A Nightmare on Elm Street, which talks about suburbia as far as teens being haunted in their dreams, and The People Under the Stairs, which is essentially about gentrification. And even if you look at more modern movies like Paranormal Activity or Sinister, the Conjuring series, and more recently, Get Out, the setting was about suburbia and all that comes with it, all the baggage. The template was set. And the ghost story doesn't need castles. It just needs a house that looks like home. Poltergeist is about ghosts. And it is about suburbia. But it's also about the illusion of safety. And about how progress can sometimes mean forgetting what came before. About how we fill our homes with noise and screens until we can't hear what's really trying to speak to us. It's about us. You know, as I was researching and revisiting Poltergeist, something really dawned on me. At its core, this film is about strong women. Diane Freeling is the true hero of the story. What she endures, what she's willing to do for her family, and especially for Carol Ann, goes beyond courage. It's love in its fiercest form. Watching her fight through fear and exhaustion, I realized that this was something I've been lucky enough to grow up surrounded by strong, loving, and determined women. As much as I've talked about my childhood, about people moving away, and the changes in my neighborhood, what really shaped me were the women who stayed, who held things together. The mothers, the sisters, the daughters, the heart of every home I've ever known. So tonight, this episode is dedicated not only to Heather O'Rourke and Dominique Dunn, whose light continues to echo through this film, but also to my beautiful wife, my beautiful sister, the memory of my beautiful mother. Thank you for your love and your strength and your patience, for helping me become the man I am, or at least the man I'm still trying to be. And to you listeners, thank you for spending this time with me, for indulging my jibber-jabber about horror and all the weird, wonderful joy it brings. On the next episode, we'll be taking a deeper dive, probably the deepest cut yet, into one of the most underrated and quietly influential horror films of the 1980s. Until then, thank you for listening to My Bloody Love Letter. And remember, love is eternal, and so is family.